Welcome back to our YouTube channel. Today, I will talk about a crime, drama, and thriller film from 2002 titled Red Dragon. Without further ado, let's get started. The movie begins with Dr. Hannibal Lecter, a well-known forensic psychiatrist who arranges a soiree in his Baltimore townhouse after a musical night. During supper, the primary topic of discussion is the disappearance of one of their musicians. When Hannibal presents a delectable supper to the symphony board, he is asked about the name of the food, to which he responds, "If I tell you, I'm afraid you won't even try it." The doorbell rings as Hannibal is cleaning the dining area. It is Will Graham, a young, talented FBI agent with whom Hannibal has been collaborating on a psychological profile of a nearby serial murderer. Informing Hannibal about the investigation, Will continues that the murderer is genuinely a cannibal, since the victim's edible body parts, such as the thymus, kidneys, and liver, were taken from the bodies after they were slain. After they decide to talk about this in the morning, Hannibal leaves the room to get Will's coat. Will starts to explore the antiques in the room, but when he opens a book, he finds evidence linking Dr. Hannibal to the killings. Before he can process the truth, Hannibal attacks him with a knife. However, using arrows and pistol shots, Will manages to injure Hannibal. Both men manage to recover from severe damage. Will retires from the FBI after being deeply traumatized by the event, while Hannibal is later given a sentence of 9 consecutive life terms. Several years have passed, and Will is living his best life in Marathon, Florida, with his wife, Molly, and a son, Josh. As he is fixing a boat, Special Agent Jack Crawford approaches and requests his help to catch another serial killer named Tooth Fairy. The convict follows and kills families on the full moon. He uses mirror pieces to penetrate them into the victim's eye sockets and latex gloves so the FBI doesn't get his fingerprints. Will agrees since he feels losing another family would be an awful load on his life. Later, Will visits the house that is stained red from the brutal murder of the Leeds family. While brainstorming, he gets that the killer needed the audience. That's why he put mirrors in the victim's eyes. Will learns that talcum powder was found on the victim's thighs, which means that the murderer had taken off the gloves to touch her eyes. He calls Jack and instructs him to check the eyes of Mrs. Leeds, whose body is still in the morgue. At the meeting with the FBI officials and police officers, Will concludes his investigation, saying that the killer's primary target was just Mrs. Leeds and Mrs. Jacoby. At the same time, the other family members were killed to complete his fantasy. He thinks that killer was not out of control while assassinating the family. Instead, the women were carefully chosen, and there is a connection between them that the police have to find before they can lose another family. Following Will's instructions, latent print expert Carl finds a thumb impression on Mrs. Leeds' left eye. While talking to Jack, Will states that his job has been done, and now he wants to go home. He tells Jack that he captured former murderers with Hannibal's assistance, so he cannot catch this one alone. Hearing this, Jack gives him the idea that he must once again see Hannibal and ask for his assistance in capturing the Tooth Fairy. Later, he seeks permission from the chief of the staff, Dr. Chilton, to meet Hannibal and persuades him for his help in solving the mystery of how the murderer is choosing the families. After an hour of assessment, Hannibal concludes that the backyards of the homes might be the factor when he selects the families. Meanwhile, a reporter named Freddie Lowndes, who previously took Will's photographs in the hospital, is stalking Will for another exclusive story to tell. On the other hand, Will revisits the victims' houses and finds that the murderer had carved a sign identified as a Chinese character, a red dragon. We are then shown Francis Dolarhyde, aka Tooth Fairy, a mentally disturbed guy with schizophrenia who is fascinated by Hannibal after learning of his atrocities. Francis calls himself the Great Red Dragon, inspired by his infatuation with William Blake's picture, The Great Red Dragon and the Woman Clothed with the Sun. His violent and sexual urges resulted from the repeated abuse from his grandmother in his early years. Working at a video processing company, he falls in love with his blind co-worker, Reba McLean, who later shows interest in him. Meanwhile, Hannibal uses a phone to get Will's address without knowing the staff, as Will is trying to get the contact of Mr. Jacoby's son from his first wife. Jack arrives and informs him about a fan note hidden in Hannibal's cell, found during routine cleanup that the Tooth Fairy might have mailed. He intercepts it without Hannibal's knowledge and finds that they communicate through Tatler's newspaper. After Lloyd Bauman, an FBI agent, breaks the code, it is revealed that Hannibal has given Tooth Fairy the address to Will's home in Florida and has advised him to kill Will's family. However, Josh and Molly are evacuated before Tooth Fairy can invade their home. Freddie Lowndes gets arrested for trying to get the Leeds family autopsy photos using a fake bureau ID. Instead of keeping him under custody, Jack wants to use him against Tooth Fairy. Following their plan, Will offers Freddie an interview in which he makes negative remarks about the killer, describing him as weak and foolish. He does this to draw Francis into a trap. However, instead of following Will, Francis kidnaps Freddy for writing wrong about his strength. Freddy tells him that Will told him to lie. Enraged by Freddy, Tooth Fairy makes him record a letter of praise for him, then burns him alive and pushes the wheelchair down the street until it stops before Tatler's office. The FBI gets the recording, but decides not to step back, but to learn from their mistakes and carry on the investigation. Jack instructs his co-workers to find the wheelchair's date and name of the manufacturer and look for the distributor who delivered the Tatler's newspaper early in the morning for Francis to read. To narrow down the search, Will decides to revisit Hannibal and convinces him for assistance in exchange for the complete restoration of his privileges and access to AMA archives. Hannibal starts to help Will by instructing him to look for extensive tattooing and corrective surgery, most likely to the face. Moreover, if he wants further information, he must arrange a fancy dinner and a show. On the other hand, Reba spends the night with Francis at his big house in the woods. Francis wakes up in the morning to see Reba gone from bed. Rushing towards the room where he has kept the image of Red Dragon, Francis looks outside the window and finds her in the garden. His newly discovered love clashes with his murderous impulses, which appear in his head as the Great Red Dragon. Francis fiercely rebuffs the demand when he realizes that the Red Dragon wants the woman. Instead of handing over Reba to his evil thoughts, he prefers to kill himself. Suddenly, his eyes are on the picture that says the Brooklyn Museum. To deny Red Dragon's ownership over him, he leaves Reba in her home and heads his way to the Brooklyn Museum. After requesting to see the painting, he knocks down the female staff member who led him to a back room to view the artwork. Tearing the original watercolor painting, Francis eats it, thinking it will defeat the Red Dragon. When a second female worker enters the room, Francis strikes her. He flees, but he doesn't murder any of the women. Will is watching the family videos repeatedly because, according to him, the videos are trying to show something they cannot comprehend. He concludes that the murderer was familiar with the layout of his victims' homes thanks to their home videos, which the murderer could only have viewed if he had worked for the home video editing firm. And after hearing the news about the museum, Will figures that the Red Dragon might be doing this because he wants to end his insanity. Later, Jack and Will visit the company to speak with the management, identifying the guy the FBI is looking for as Francis Dolarhyde. The manager reveals to the agents that Francis has access to every home video that went through the business as part of his duties. Francis witnesses the agents in the building and immediately leaves to avoid an interaction. He later heads his way to Reba's home, but finds Ralph, her co-worker, who is also interested in her, outside her house talking about their dinner night. Before Ralph can leave, Francis shoots him in the head and kidnaps Reba. Taking Reba to his home, Francis informs her that he did a thing so the Red Dragon couldn't have her, but in exchange, she made him weak and hurt him. Francis sets the house on fire and prepares his gun to shoot Reba and then himself, so the Red Dragon can never get Reba. However, he cannot attack his love, thus he kills himself. Reba manages to get out of the house before it explodes. The FBI arrives on time and takes Reba for medical attention. After consulting to get her out of the trauma, Will heads his way back home. Jack gets a call from the forensic department stating that the remains taken after the explosion are not Francis, but his co-worker Ralph Mandy. Will is chatting with his wife when his son goes into the house to take something from the pantry. When he doesn't return for long, Will decides to look for him in the home. As he enters the lounge, he witnesses the mirror shattered into pieces, Francis' signature style. Before Jack can warn him on the call, Will gets the idea of invasion. Suspecting a danger, Will takes out a knife and heads his way upstairs, where he sees Francis holding his son with a broken mirror in his hand. Just then, Will hits on an idea to treat his son just like Francis' grandmother treated him. The bitter throwback enrages Francis, so he leaves Josh and attacks Will. Hitting Francis with a knife, Will manages to escape with Josh and hide in a room. When Molly gets upstairs to find Will, Francis shoots from behind. However, she bends down on Will's instructions, resulting in a firing between Will and Francis. Injured after the attack, he tries to get up but is killed by Molly. After some time, we see Will sailing about with his family while reading a letter by Hannibal wishing him well. He says he thinks about Will more often. The movie ends with Dr. Chilton informing Hannibal about a young female FBI agent who has come to ask him a few questions. Hannibal Lecter looks up and inquires about her name, unfolding another mystery yet to be solved. If you have already watched this movie, share your reviews with us in the comments below. Before you go, make sure to like this video and subscribe.